It was my turn to take my kids trick-or-treating. The previous year had been my wife's, and we trade off every year. My son and daughter are 7 and 9. Usually, I stay on the street while my kids go up to the different houses to collect candy. After about half an hour of walking around, we arrived at one of the more popular hotspots for candy collecting. A main street in the neighborhood, filled with really cool decorations and animatronics on people's lawns. I became a bit distracted and stopped watching my kids closely. At one point, they came back from a house accompanied by another girl about the same height as my daughter. She wore a weird homemade mask, like a cardboard cutout. My daughter asked if she could trick-or-treat with us, so I said sure, and we continued together as a group. I didn't know who this girl was, but I figured she was a friend from school. As we walked, I started to notice a large man trailing us. He wore some sort of angry cat mask, and it was kind of creepy, to be honest. I thought he might be the father of the girl, so I tried to make small talk. I casually remarked about the nice weather, but he didn't respond. He just stood there staring at me while our kids went up the stairs to the next house. I tried again, asking if she was his daughter. He nodded but didn't say anything. I figured he just wasn't in the mood for chatting, so I stopped trying. We carried on for about another 15 minutes, until suddenly my kids came up to me and said they wanted to go home. This surprised me since we hadn't been out for too long, and their bags were only about a third full. I agreed, waved goodbye to the man in the cat mask and his daughter, and started on our way home. The weird thing was that when I glanced back, the man and his daughter were just standing there staring at us. I checked one more time as we turned the corner, and they were still standing there, not having moved at all. At that point, I asked my kids who the girl was. My daughter looked up at me, confused. She told me the girl with the cardboard mask had approached them and said she was a friend of mine. The girl told my daughter she was too shy to ask me if she could join us, so she wanted my daughter to ask me instead. I laughed at this story and replied that I didn't have any child friends. What my daughter said next chilled my bones. She explained that when the girl with the cardboard mask first approached them, she wasn't wearing the mask, so they could see her face. It turned out that she wasn't a girl at all, but an older woman around my age, with wrinkles on her face. What was even more disturbing was that the old woman had started to steal treats from my daughter's bag when I wasn't looking. This was why they had asked to go home. The old woman was creeping them out, and they just wanted to get away from her. I brought my kids home and told my wife what happened. We made sure to check through all their candy, but didn't find anything suspicious or off. We didn't call the police or anything since nothing really happened. But thinking back, I kind of regret that decision now. What the heck was the old woman doing? And who was that man following us around? I don't think I'll ever know. I just think it's sick that there are people out there on Halloween, hiding behind masks and pretending to be children. This happened only a few hours ago. I've reported it to the police and made it home safely, but I'm still in shock. Writing it down feels like a way to process what happened. Since I finished work early, I decided to go for a run. I set out around 4:30 and chose a different route, a canal towpath and some wooded trails that I knew would be quieter than my usual busy streets. Everything was going smoothly, and I was pacing myself well until around 6 kilometers into the run. The path was a long, straight stretch with a canal on my left and an abandoned lot, with remnants of old factories on my right. Overgrown with trees and weeds, it looked almost desolate, with the occasional fragment of a factory still standing, including an old metal fire escape. As I reached this spot, I saw a rough-looking man perched on a wall with his legs dangling. The moment he saw me, he jumped to his feet and called out something I couldn't quite make out. When I got closer, he was telling me to wait and asking if I could help him find his phone. He was already coming down the fire escape stairs, and I stopped when I reached the base of the steps, keeping a few feet between us. A rusted iron fence with spiked bars separated us, like the kind you see around old churches. He explained that he had dropped his phone nearby and wanted someone to ring it so he could listen for it. With my phone strapped to my arm, refusing felt awkward, so I took it off, unlocked it, and asked him for the number. He rattled off a number too fast for me to catch, and it didn't even start with the usual 07 prefix, which raised a red flag. But I still wasn't overly concerned. There was a fence between us, and I had a decent size and weight advantage over him. He didn't seem in good shape, maybe even homeless, and I thought if he tried anything, his only real threat would be a knife. I kept my distance and my eyes on his hands. When I asked him to repeat the number, he started again, this time with the 07. I entered about 7 digits when he suddenly started looking around, saying he could hear it, and asking if I'd come help look. I was about to tell him I hadn't even finished dialing when another man appeared, a much larger figure, stepping out from behind a piece of wall to my right. He looked equally rough, with a dazed, drugged expression. He joined in, insisting he could also hear the ringing and gesturing for me to come through a gap in the fence to help. Then the first guy was acting as though he were checking. Was it ringing or not? I nodded, though I hadn't completed dialing. At that moment, I was certain this was a setup. They were trying to lure me to the other side of the fence. They both continued encouraging me to cross through, claiming they could hear the phone ringing nearby. Then, I overheard the larger man mumble to himself, almost under his breath, about how I wasn't going to fall for it. His words were clear in the quiet, isolated area. The first guy started acting agitated, going on about needing the phone badly, and punching a tree in frustration. Meanwhile, the larger man moved to my right, creating a situation where I couldn't watch them both. By this point, it was after 5 p.m., and the sky had quickly darkened, making the whole encounter even more unsettling. I noticed a gap in the fence where some bars had been removed, right where the larger man was moving. I turned and sprinted away without looking back. Strangely, neither of them called out or tried to get me to stop. If they genuinely needed help, I would have expected them to yell or try to get my attention. Instead, they stayed silent, which confirmed that they had other intentions. After running for 20 to 30 seconds, I glanced back and saw them both standing by the gap in the fence, just watching me run. I kept running until I was far enough to reach the roads. When I reported it to the police, they took my details and the descriptions I gave, but seemed to downplay the situation, though they assured me it would be looked into. I feel rattled, and am certain I won't be taking that route alone again anytime soon. Last year, I started law school in Los Angeles. Having never lived in a big city before, I was excited to finally be in a huge place with over 4 million people. Since I was young, I'd known about my half-sister in LA, but my parents had always been oddly bitter about her. Talking about her felt off limits, so while I knew she existed and what she looked like from social media, that was the extent of it. We'd never met, and her social media presence was sparse. Out of nowhere during my first year, I received a friend request on Facebook from my sister. Her profile looked genuine, complete with friends and a recognizable profile photo. She sent me a message inviting me to a small dinner gathering with her friends at a local park so we could finally meet. Being new to LA, I didn't know which places to avoid at night, so I didn't think much of the location. I was thrilled, but also a bundle of nerves. Part of me hoped we'd hit it off and become close, but I also feared awkwardness, mismatched personalities, or the emotional overload of reuniting with her in front of strangers. It felt too significant a moment to share with others, and I didn't want the pressure of a crowd. Honestly, if she had suggested a quieter place like a small bakery, I might have gone. But the idea of meeting in a park with her friends around felt wrong. So, in the end, I decided not to go, worried about how unpredictable or intense it might get. A few weeks later, I got curious and looked up that park, wondering if maybe we could meet there one-on-one. What I discovered was unsettling. I won't name it, but locals know it's not a safe area for anyone, especially at night. The park is in a neighborhood known for high violent crime rates and gang activity. I couldn't believe I'd been invited to meet there. Worried, I tried reaching out to my sister another way. I learned she was attending a nearby college, where a friend of mine also went, so I asked my friend to contact her on my behalf. Luckily, they connected, and we all met at my friend's house instead. That night was wonderful. We clicked right away, and my friend was thrilled to help us meet. The three of us had a relaxed evening together. No dramatic tears, but there were a few emotional moments. We shared a meal, watched a movie, and even spent the night at my friend's place. Later, I told my sister about the odd Facebook invite. She was baffled, saying she hadn't used Facebook since high school. Someone had been impersonating her, but by then, the fake account was already deleted. She wasn't entirely surprised, though, as she'd had friends scammed by a fake profile of her selling concert tickets in the past. It was chilling to think that someone had been pretending to be my sister, knew I was in town, and tried to lure me into one of LA's most dangerous areas at night. I have no idea what they intended, and I'm not sure I want to find out. In the end, meeting my sister after all those years was incredible, but the whole situation still haunts me. When I was 18, I worked at a local coffee shop in my hometown, often picking up extra shifts and closing 6 nights a week. It was a routine, uneventful job with a mix of regulars and random customers. Except for a few awkward interactions now and then, I hadn't experienced anything out of line. One night, Halloween as it happened had already started on a stressful note. I was bummed about working while my friends were out, but I'd made plans to meet up with them at a nearby house they'd rented after work. I even had a stash of pastries and Red Bull set aside for a fun end to the night. It was close to closing, around 9:45 p.m., and things were dead quiet. I was already set to shut down right at 10. All that remained was a final register count. Everything else was cleaned up, and I'd started reading a book to pass the time. The counter where I stood was long, with the register near the entrance and an open end by the door to the back room. Then a man walked in. He looked about mid-20s, wearing a big hoodie and sagging sweatpants that exposed the waistbands of multiple gym shorts underneath. He was black. I'm white. But I'd grown up around people of all backgrounds and didn't think much of it. I greeted him warmly, asked how he was doing, and if he wanted to order anything. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he stared at the front door. After a minute, he looked at me and asked my name. This wasn't unusual. People asked that all the time, so I told him and asked again if he wanted to order, but he only started asking me questions about myself and my job. I figured he might be interested in a position, so I gave a short, polite answer, thinking about how much I just wanted to finish up and meet my friends. He then made an odd comment, something like he thought I liked my job, which struck me as strange. I agreed politely, still trying to steer him toward placing an order, but his next question made me pause. He wanted to know why I didn't work on Thursdays. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't expected that. I tried to keep calm, but then he started asking about other specific shifts, like if I preferred Sunday mornings over Wednesday nights. At this point, I let out a nervous laugh and asked if he was interested in working at the shop, but his smile vanished, and he shifted his hand from his hoodie pocket to the waistband of his gym shorts, making me feel cold with dread. I told him it was almost closing time and he needed to order or leave, clutching my phone and trying to figure out how I could call 911 without setting him off. He leaned closer, moving down the counter toward the open end, asking personal questions about where I lived, if I had a boyfriend, and what I was doing later that night. I kept my answers vague, hoping he'd lose interest and leave, but instead, he started inching toward the open end of the counter, still with his hand down his pants. Cornered between the counter and the front door with no quick way out, I asked again if he was going to order. For some reason, he stopped, glanced at the front door, and looked at the clock. Quickly, I texted a friend, "If I am not there in 10 minutes, call the police." He noticed, though, and demanded to know who I was texting. I said it was my boyfriend, which seemed to provoke him. His eyes went hard, and he ordered me to throw my phone toward the drive-through window. Trembling, I did as he asked, hurling it about 9 feet away. After that, he went off screaming about how he'd watched me work for 2 months, saying he'd never seen anyone drop me off or pick me up, so I shouldn't lie to him. He pointed toward the side of the building, saying he knew I'd parked my blue Toyota there earlier. I was completely panicked now, close to tears, and asked him again to leave. But he started rattling off details about my work habits. When I came and left, where I took my breaks, the Diet Coke I always drank, even how loud I played my music when I started my car. Then he pulled a small gun from his shorts and waved it around, mocking me for being stupid enough to lie. His mood swung wildly, one moment laughing, the next seething with anger, as if he was caught between disbelief that I didn't want to talk to him and amusement at my fear. I offered him all the money in the register, but he just laughed, saying he wasn't here for money or a job. Then, in a chilling tone, he made it clear that he thought I knew why he was there. I was sobbing by now, and it seemed to either annoy or soften him. He told me to calm down, that he was just excited to meet me. But he kept fondling himself with one hand while holding the gun in the other. Then suddenly the front door opened and my friend walked in with a group of his bandmates. The man froze, shoving the gun back into his hoodie pocket. Only 2 of my friends seemed to notice the weapon. Without a word, he pushed past them and disappeared into the night. As soon as he left, I broke down, throwing up from the shock and fear. 2 of my friends tried to follow him, but he was gone. I quit my job the next day and reported everything to the police, but there was no follow-up, and I never found out who he was or what he might have done if my friends hadn't shown up when they did. The thought of it still chills me to this day. I had a strange unsolved experience as a kid that's been on my mind a lot lately, and I thought this might be the place to share it. The story starts on Halloween in 1991. I was 7 years old, and my little sister was only a few months old. We lived on the border of 2 neighborhoods on Long Island, New York, one more affluent and the other a lower income area. My dad owned a popular bar across from the train station, which had done well through the 80s and was still hanging on. Our family was well known around town, largely because of my dad's business. Even though he later struggled with addiction and lost much of what he'd built, I had nothing but love and respect for him. On that Halloween night, my mom was working the night shift at my dad's bar, and my sister was at home with a teenage babysitter. My dad had taken me and a friend out trick-or-treating, my first year getting to go out at night, which I was super excited about. When we got home, though, there were police cars outside. The babysitter was crying, and my mom had come home early. Turns out, while the sitter was alone with my sister, she'd received a phone call from an unknown woman asking to speak to Little, my name. The sitter explained I wasn't there, and the woman said she had a gift for me and would call back. She did call back a few times, each time saying she wanted to bring the gift, and eventually said to look in the mailbox. That's when the babysitter called the police. The police ended up finding a Halloween pirate skull decoration that shook and talked when you clapped, along with a few candy bars. The whole thing freaked out my family. I was a bit scared too, but I also kind of liked the skull and somehow convinced my parents to let me keep it, even though they hated it. For weeks they were uneasy, but there wasn't much the police could do, and eventually, it all seemed to blow over. Then, in the summer of 1992, when I was 8, my best friend and I decided to set up a car wash in front of his house, which was right across the street from mine. We had our buckets, soap, hose, the whole setup. Suddenly, this black car pulled up, something big and old like an 80s Crown Vic. The driver, a woman with short white hair that kind of gave her an Ursula look, rolled down the window. I remember thinking she looked old, but now I realize she might have only been in her 40s. She looked at me and said, "Do you know who I am?" I shook my head, speechless. She smiled and said, "I'm the one who gave you those nice presents on Halloween." I just froze, staring at her in shock. Then she laughed, a loud, maniacal kind of laugh, and sped off. I ran home and told my parents, They were horrified but couldn't make sense of it. My dad speculated that she might have been someone who thought he was wealthy, maybe angling for a ransom, or maybe she was an ex with a grudge. I've wondered about her motives. It's been over 2 decades since all this happened, and I'm now 35. But recently, some of my dad's old friends reached out to me on Facebook. We share the same name and look a lot alike, so they found me easily. 2 of them were women, and one in particular made me uncomfortable. She kept pushing to hang out, suggested we go to a bar together, even though there's a big age gap. She also asked a lot of personal questions. That's what brought all these memories rushing back. I can't shake this weird feeling in my gut, wondering if this woman, or even the other one who found me online, might somehow be connected to that strange experience in my childhood. It gives me chills, but I still wish I could know who that person was and her intentions.